What's up, tribe? How you guys doing? Go ahead and hit that subscribe button, and I hope you like this video. We are back for the Secrets of Playboy, Season 1, Episode 4. This episode is called The Price of Loyalty, and this is all about the drugs, okay? So last episode was all about the bunnies. This one is all about the drugs, and listen. And once again, we have people on here who are saying Hef never did this. He might have smoked a little weed, maybe popped a pill once or twice, but this isn't his thing. He didn't want drugs in the mansion. He didn't want drugs around. And then you have other people that are like, yeah, right. It was drugs everywhere. So let's get into it. So most of this episode takes place in Chicago because the main stories we're talking about took place in the Playboy mansion in Chicago. So let me talk a little bit about that. That's where his empire started, was in Chicago. And he had a mansion in Chicago where he lived, his secretary lived there with him, and then he had bunnies who worked in the club. They had dormitories where the bunnies could live. And so again, he had this huge property. They had all these different apartments. I think he said the bunnies lived on the top 2 floors. And of course he had a game room, and everything he had at the Playboy mansion. He even had like a pool that was like on the first floor, and there was a way to open up the latch and look down into the pool from upstairs. It was a whole situation he had going on at the mansion in Chicago, right? So we meet a couple of characters, not characters, I don't mean characters like it, but people. A couple of people that are very prominent in this story is a woman by the name of Bobby Aristine and Adrian Pollock. Okay? Now, Adrian Pollock was a Playboy bunny, and Bobby Aristine was Hugh Heffner's executive secretary in Chicago. And she actually lived at in the Playboy mansion. Now, she had her own apartment there. Now, what we found out is that the police were looking at Hugh Heffner and Playboy as drug traffickers, right? They thought that they had a whole drug trafficking thing going on. And so in 1973, Adrian Pollock died of an apparent drug overdose at the club, at the Playboy Club. In 1974, Bobby Aristine was arrested for alleged drug trafficking and was put on trial. Now, we're going to finish that story in a second. Let's go back a little bit. Bobby Aristine was the person that made it happen at the Playboy mansion in Chicago, okay? When people came through there to party, to hang out, whatever they wanted, they got from her. Whatever special request, whatever. She was Hugh Heffner's executive secretary, on call 24 hours a day. She was 32 years old. And that's probably why he had her living there, so that he could have access to her whenever he needed it, for whatever he needed her to take care of. And so, for a lot of people, they don't think it's that far-fetched that she was the one that supplied the drugs. Now, multiple people said that Hugh didn't go nowhere. Hef didn't go nowhere. So the drugs had to be getting into the mansion somehow, because there were drugs there. Now, we had this one guy by the name of Keith Strope. Now, Keith Strope said, listen, I've been trying my whole life to get medical marijuana or recreational marijuana legal. I make no bones about that. He said, Bobby was my best friend. Whenever I came to town, I stayed at her apartment. I was interviewed by Playboy. I partied with Hugh Heffner, like he said. And, you know, he said, for the exception of smoking some weed, maybe popping a pill or two, I never saw Hugh Heffner doing no drugs. Now, let's be clear. He the only one in this whole episode that said that. But I gotta say, he did say that. He said that he ain't nothing going on with him, with Hugh Heffner and no drugs, okay? He said that, you know, him and Bobby he said they snorted cocaine from time to time. They had a little party drug, you know. But even with that, it was not regular. And he said that he knew that other people in the mansion told him, you better not let Hef know you got it, because you'll be out of here. He don't play that, right? But again, he the only one that said this. I ain't saying it ain't true. I'm just saying he the only one that said it. So Bobby, being Hugh Heffner's executive secretary, one thing we found out, we found this out later on in the episode, but she was a little frustrated with that. She was frustrated with her pay grade. She was frustrated that she, even though she did everything at that mansion, she kept it organized, she ran it. The fact that Hugh never made her management, but always kept her as a secretary, even though she was doing management type stuff. And the fact that she had all these men around her in these high positions, but she was always ignored or not respected for that. So she didn't feel like she was compensated through financially, and she definitely didn't feel like she was compensated legally, right? I mean, with any type of accolades or promotions or anything like that. So we know that that was part of it, right? We'll get to that. So, well, not get to that, I just told you. So, Joni Mattis was his social secretary. And again, Joni Mattis is saying a lot of the same things that, she's saying a lot of the same things as far as the drugs are concerned. And she said that there were Quaaludes everywhere. She said Quaaludes were considered, they called them the leg openers. She said that's crass, and I'm sorry to be crass about it, but Quaaludes were everywhere because they needed the drugs to keep the girls loose, to keep the girls the inhibition low. And once again, we see Sandra Theodore, who is his ex-girlfriend. She was his girlfriend from 1976 to 1981. We met her last episode when she spoke about, all of the bunnies and stuff. And we've seen her on all of the episodes, actually. But we see her again, once again, we see her talking. And she talked about the drugs. She said the first time I did any drugs at the Playboy Mansion, she said it was Hugh Hefner's birthday party, and I had to sing, and I was nervous. And I actually had a video clip of it showing her singing. And she said I was backstage and I was nervous, and somebody offered me a bump. And everybody was like, "What are you talking about? No bumps, no bumps." Until she was like, "Oh, you talking about cocaine?" And she said that's when she started using drugs. And she said there were drugs all over the mansion. Like, that's crazy. There were drugs everywhere. Now, a couple of people talked about the fact that Hugh Hefner had a drawer in his room, and that's where he kept his drugs. His little drawer, he said, and he was on the lock and key. Nobody could get in that drawer, and that's where he kept his own personal, I guess, situation. Now, they said that, now this is in Chicago, that all of them had prescriptions for Quaaludes, and they would rotate who would go and get the prescription filled. They had these fake prescriptions, and she said, I had one, Hef had one, Bobby had one, and she named 2 or 3 other people, and she said they actually had it on the calendar, Hef's Q, Bobby's Q, knowing it was their time to go get that prescription filled so they could keep the Quaaludes in the house. She said that, of course, marijuana. She said cocaine as well. She said Hugh Hefner also used speed. A little bit of speed. She said he took a little bit every day. She said he didn't swallow pills. She said he couldn't swallow pills. And so he would take a little bite off of it. He'd take a little bit, chew it up a little bit, and then he put the rest in his pocket and I guess eat off of it the rest of the day or save it for the next day or whatever. But she said that was just the norm. And everybody knew about it. It wasn't a secret. She said that she always wondered how the cocaine got in the house because he ain't go nowhere. And a couple of people said that he didn't go anywhere, so where were the drugs coming from? So, let's talk a little bit about Adrienne Pollock, the Playboy Bunny. Now, Adrienne, we met her 2 of her sisters. And both of them said, hey, she was a little bit of a wild child. What I appreciated about her sisters is that they were not trying to make her out to be some angel that was corrupted by the Playboy, machine. They were really honest about the fact that, yeah, my sister probably did all of that, right? So what we found out is that she became a Playboy Bunny. She had only been a Playboy Bunny for like a year before she died. They just said 1972 she became a bunny, and she died in 1973. In the time that she was a bunny, she started off living in the dorms. They said she moved in to the Playboy Mansion almost immediately. But after a while, she got tired of, girls stealing her stuff and just the cattiness of living with a bunch of women. And so she wanted her own. So her and her boyfriend, they got an apartment off campus, like it was a school. But they got the apartment, not too far away from, they said they weren't living too far from the mansion. She said the last time she saw her sister, it was her 23rd birthday. She came by the house, and it was unexpected. It was late at night. It was kind of out of nowhere, but she took pictures with her family, and she surprised them, and they had a good time or whatever. So then, she said, but that's the last time she saw her sister alive. She said one day she was outside with some friends out in front of the house because she was 18 when her sister died. The police pulled up, and the police said, I'm sorry to tell you, but your daughter has passed away. And we find out that they didn't have any answers. They couldn't tell them anything. They just said she died of an apparent drug overdose, but they didn't have any what, when, where, how, like nothing. And they never got any real answers. But what they don't believe is that she OD'd on her own. They think it was some foul play involved. Now, what we also know is while she was a Playboy bunny, she told her family that she worked as a mule. That she carried the drugs back and forth into the mansion. She said one time she called her sister from Florida, and her sister was like, girl, what you doing in Florida? And she was like, oh, I'm down here with so-and-so. And she told her sister he was a big drug, a drug dealer. And she was like, you're not worried? You're not scared to be down there with this guy? And she was like, no, it's a bunch of us here. It's a bunch of the bunnies here. We flew out, and she used to fly around on the Playboy plane. They said she'd been to Vegas, and they showed actual postcards from her from Vegas, from Florida, from Montego Bay, Jamaica, and she would travel. They said that she didn't fly on the jet every single time, but she traveled a lot for Playboy, and it was to traffic drugs. That's what she told them. And they said, we believe it, and they said we also believe that she was taking drugs because her behavior did start becoming a little erratic, but it was really almost as soon as she started working for Playboy that we started noticing these things, which again coincides with what the other women were saying about the drugs were everywhere, and they gave them to the girls to lower their inhibition, so whatever went down. Now, fast forward a little bit to, I think it was 2004, her boyfriend, Adrian's boyfriend, finally did write out a statement. He didn't do it at the time because he lawyered up, and of course he didn't want to be the finger to point at him that he had anything to do with anything. So he didn't give a statement at the time, and I guess child statute of limitations are probably up on whatever he did do. So he finally did write out a statement, and he said, yes, he said Adrian worked for Playboy and she trafficked drugs in and out. Like she was a drug mule while she worked for Playboy. And he also doesn't believe that her death was, he believes it was some foul play as well. So we find out that as a result of this, there was some breadcrumbs, and the FBI and local police were starting to investigate Playboy. And they were convinced that there was major drugs being trafficked, through the mansion. So he became, Hugh Heffner and Playboy became a target of an investigation. They had a whole task force and stuff. And Bobby actually started dating a drug dealer. And I feel like the drug dealer was known to Chicago police. And so one day, coming out of the Playboy mansion, she was leaving the mansion to go wherever she was going. The police, searched her, and they found a half a pound of cocaine in her bag. Now, my first question is, was that legal? Like, did they have any sort of probable cause to just pull her over and just start searching her? But neither here nor there. That half a pound of cocaine was enough for her to have to go to trial. And she actually was convicted, and she was found guilty, and she was sentenced to 15 years in prison. But these were federal charges, so she was out pending her sentencing, right? She had time pending her sentencing. So during that time period, the government called her back in to the office, and they were pressuring her to testify against Hugh Heffner. Now, she agreed to testify, but then the FBI called her and her attorneys back into the office and told her attorneys, listen, we have some credible information that there's a hit out on your life, and you need to be very careful to guard yourself against friends and foes. And of course, what she walked away from that is thinking that Hugh Heffner had turned on her or whatever. So before she could testify, she committed suicide. Now, the question was, again, her family doesn't think that that's what it was, and her friends doesn't, now the guy Keith Stout, he believes that's what happened. He said, listen, the pressure just got to be too much. I wasn't there for her as a friend. I wasn't there to protect her, but it happened. Now, allegedly, she took a couple of pills that morning, and then she drove to a little no-tell motel, checked in, took the rest of the pills, and she actually left a note. She did leave a note. Now, they didn't get into what the note said, but she did leave a note. So the question is, did she really do it? Like, was it foul play, or did she really do it? And of course, we still don't have any answers to those questions. Now, back to Sandra Theodore. Now, Sandra Theodore starts talking about her years in the Playboy Mansion out in California. Again, from 1976 to 81, she was Hugh Hefner's girlfriend. And she said, yeah, I was a drug mule for him. One day he asked me to take some money somewhere and pick up the drugs and bring them back to the house. And I did it because I was his girlfriend, and I didn't see it as the danger that it is. I look back now and I realize how dangerous it was, but at the time I didn't see it as that. That was my boyfriend, and I was doing what my boyfriend was asking me to do, and I almost felt special, like he trusted me with this important, job. And she said that, she brought drugs into the mansion on a weekly basis. Back in Chicago, they talked about in the downstairs bathroom where the the paper towel dispenser was. The toilet paper. Lord, I couldn't get it out. The toilet paper dispenser, there was a way that you could lift up. I guess there's a part of it you could lift up, and they said it was full of cocaine. So this guy that's talking about, oh my gosh, there was no drugs in the mansion. I'm like, well, this lady say in the bathroom, it was a whole thing in the bathroom, right? And so, Sandra talked about how, in hindsight, Hugh Heffner, her boyfriend who supposedly loved her, had her in danger of going to jail or worse, and he didn't seem to think anything of it. It wasn't a big deal. He didn't, it was no issue for him. And so she thinks back on it and thinks about just kind of how callous that was of him. But baby, ultimately the investigation fell apart once Bobby died, because they really didn't have anybody else that they could call in to testify. Nobody else. She didn't give them anything before she died. And, Adrian's family was hoping that she would have some information about what happened to Adrian. But, of course, all of that went with her. And so, ultimately, nothing ever really came of the investigation. And they weren't able to ever, put anything on Hugh Heffner. And so, he, And I feel like shortly after that is when he left town. That's when he took his happy ass out to California permanently. He got out of Chicago. But anyway, we know by 1976 he was in Chicago, living in, by 1976 he was living at the Playboy Mansion in LA. We know that. And he still had the mansion in Chicago, but he was spending more and more time in LA by the late 70s. And all of this, Bobby died in 1974. So that was a 2-year window. Anyway, y'all let me know what y'all think. We'll talk about it later. Peace.